Introduction to Geosystems. Here are our learning goals for today. Explain what the four spheres are and the science that studies each sphere. Describe the carbon and water cycles and explain how carbon and water are recycled through the different spheres. Here's a picture of our planet taken by the Apollo astronauts on their way back from the moon. When we look at this picture, we can see a lot. First thing you notice is the land masses, the ocean. We see clouds in the sky. We see the green here of the tropical rainforest in Africa. And we see the Antarctic ice cap. When we look at the Earth, we see it as a whole. But in order to study the Earth and make it more convenient to learn about it, we break the Earth down into what we call spheres. The geosphere are all the solid parts of the Earth, all the rocks and minerals. And the science that studies the geosphere is called geology. The hydrosphere is all the liquid water on Earth, including the ice, so the oceans, the polar caps, groundwater, and surface water. The science that studies the hydrosphere is called oceanography. The atmosphere, of course, is all the gases that surround the Earth, including the clouds in the sky. And the science that studies the atmosphere is meteorology. We're going to study all three of these spheres in this class. And the last sphere is the biosphere. That's all the living things on Earth. Now, you guys studied that, of course, in biology. We're not going to touch on the biosphere very much. The four spheres are constantly interacting with each other. Even though we separate parts of the Earth to make it convenient to study them, in fact, it's one system in which all the different parts are constantly interacting with each other. So the geosphere, the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the biosphere are constantly interacting. The atmosphere, the biosphere, and the hydrosphere act on the geosphere and cause weathering and other phenomena. The atmosphere and the geosphere interact in exchanging carbon dioxide. Same thing with the ocean. The ocean and the atmosphere exchange heat, and our weather is dependent on what happens in the oceans, believe it or not. And the biosphere interacts with all three. The biosphere changes the gases that are in the atmosphere, and the biosphere, believe it or not, living things can cause rocks to break down. So hit pause, answer these questions, and then hit play to hear the answers. Which sphere contains the gases that surround our planet, and what is the science that studies this sphere? Well, the sphere is the atmosphere, and the science is meteorology. Which sphere contains all the water on our planet, and what is the science that studies this sphere? Well, the sphere is the hydrosphere, and the science is oceanography. Which sphere contains all the solid parts of our planet, and what is the science that studies this sphere? The solid part of our Earth is the geosphere, and geology is the science that studies that. And which sphere contains all the living things on our planet? It's the biosphere, and the science that studies that is biology. Now, the Earth is part of a larger system. The Earth interacts with the universe. So we're also going to talk about astronomy, and that's the study of everything outside the Earth. The sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, and so forth. The Earth is what we call a closed system. Everything that we have here on Earth is all that we're ever really going to have. For all intents and purposes, we don't receive any more material here on Earth. Occasionally we get hit by an asteroid or a comet, but other than those rare circumstances, we don't get more matter from outside the Earth. We do get energy from the sun. So Earth is what we call a closed system. A closed system does not exchange matter with its surroundings, but it does exchange energy. So everything that we have here on planet Earth eventually gets recycled. So we need to study some of the recycling that occurs on Earth. We're going to start with the carbon cycle. Now, carbon is present in the atmosphere, the oceans, in living things, and it's also stored in the ground in the form of rocks and fossil fuels. So let's see how carbon cycles through these different spheres. Carbon gets into the atmosphere by diffusion from the ocean. There's more carbon dioxide dissolved in ocean water than there is in the atmosphere, and there's constant diffusion from the ocean into the atmosphere. When living things die and decompose, the carbon in the body is released as carbon dioxide, and of course, everyday living, cellular respiration produces carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide gets into the atmosphere through decomposition and respiration of living things, both in the ocean and on the land. And man puts carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. Carbon leaves the atmosphere by carbon dioxide diffusing from the atmosphere into the ocean. So there's two-way diffusion going on here. Carbon dioxide leaves the atmosphere through the process of photosynthesis, both by aquatic organisms and terrestrial organisms. And it ends up in fossil fuels and rocks when things in the ocean die. They carry their carbon down to the bottom of the ocean, where it ends up in the sediments at the bottom of the ocean. And these sediments eventually turn into rocks or fossil fuels. So if we put it all together, we can see that carbon leaves the atmosphere through diffusion, photosynthesis, both by aquatic and terrestrial organisms. It gets back into the atmosphere by diffusion from the ocean, by decomposition and respiration by living things both on land and in the ocean, and by burning fossil fuels. And it can be sequestered or stored as rocks and fossil fuels. So push pause, and when you're ready, push play and listen to the answers. What are the three ways carbon leaves the atmosphere? It leaves the atmosphere through diffusion into the ocean, photosynthesis by aquatic organisms, and by terrestrial organisms. What are three ways that carbon re-enters the atmosphere? It re-enters the atmosphere through diffusion from the ocean, respiration and decomposition of aquatic and terrestrial organisms, and also by burning fossil fuels. Let's look at the water cycle. You guys have studied this 100 times, but we're going to do it one more time. So water is present in the oceans, in rivers and streams on land. It's present in the atmosphere in the form of water vapor. So let's see how water cycles through the different spheres. Water gets into the atmosphere by evaporation from the ocean. Every year, about 3 feet of ocean water evaporates, and if it wasn't replaced, the ocean sea level would go down by 3 feet every year. It also gets into the atmosphere through transpiration from plants. Transpiration is sort of like evaporation from plants. And it gets into the atmosphere through evaporation from land. How does water get out of the atmosphere? Well, it gets out of the atmosphere through precipitation. So rain, snow, sleet, that sort of thing. Now, the Earth is 70% ocean, so most of the precipitation falls right back into the ocean. However, some of the precipitation falls on land, and we need to look at what happens to that. Water that reaches the surface of the earth can stay on the surface of the earth and become surface runoff and end up in lakes, streams, rivers, and back in the ocean. Or it can sink into the ground and become groundwater. Groundwater makes its way underground back to the ocean in various ways. So if we put it all together, Water enters the atmosphere through evaporation from the oceans, transpiration from plants, evaporation from land. It leaves the atmosphere through precipitation, and it returns to the ocean through surface runoff and groundwater. Hit pause, answer these questions, and when you're ready, hit play. How does water leave the atmosphere? It leaves the atmosphere through precipitation. What are the three ways that water returns to the ocean? It returns to the ocean through precipitation into the ocean, surface runoff, and groundwater. What are three ways that water enters the atmosphere? It enters the atmosphere through evaporation from the ocean, evaporation from land, and transpiration from plants.